guys, welcome back to my channel. So, as you guys may have noticed, I haven't been doing wrap-ups because, guys, wrap-ups are hard, okay? As somebody who reads a lot every month, wrap-ups are just always daunting to me, and I still have yet to figure out a way that'll make me excited to film them, so I just haven't been. But I know you guys like hearing my thoughts on stuff, and I've read some books over the past 2 months that I have thoughts on, and I want to talk about them. So, my logic here, first of all, I have a cold, so you're welcome for listening to this voice for the next, like, half hour. Apologies for that. But, my logic is I just have my 2020 reading challenge pulled up right now, which obviously is going to tell me what I've read since January 1st, and I'm just going to scroll, and I'm going to talk about books that I have thoughts on. Okay, first book that I wanted to talk about is The Wives by Tarryn Fisher. Oh man, this book, okay, this was my first Tarryn Fisher book. I've always wanted to read Tarryn Fisher because I adore her and Colleen Hoover's friendship. I just like watching them interact on social media. But Tarryn Fisher writes kind of like adult romance, erotic type stories, but they're always really weird. Like, that's all that I really know about her writing, is that her stuff is generally really dark and somewhat disturbing and bizarre, and that, like, piques my radar. I'm like, oop, want to read that, and I just haven't yet. So this is the first one that I started with, and I figured it was a safe starting point. It was featured in Book of the Month, which means it's somewhat tame, as in it's, like, acceptable for, like, the mass population, I guess you should say. But this just sounded intriguing to me because this follows a woman who is married to a man who is married to other women. So it's a polygamous marriage situation, but all of the wives don't know each other. They know about each other, but they don't know anything about the other women. So they all live separately, and he just spends a different day or night with each one. So it's just like, she is Thursday, there's also Wednesday, there's Tuesday, and they don't know anything about each other, but they're all aware of the situation, and they all seem to be okay with it. And I was like, interesting story. I picked it up on that premise, and all that we know in the synopsis going in is that our protagonist, who is one of the wives, finds out information, finds the name of another one of the wives, and goes down the, like, social media stalking hole and finds out where she lives, ends up meeting her, and realizes that her husband, their husband, might be abusing this other person, and she has never seen this in her marriage to him. So it kind of tumbles her down this rabbit hole of things to uncover. And this book, okay, so that's all I'm going to say synopsis-wise, because that's all I knew going into it, and this book was a ride. This book took me on a journey. I am one of the thriller readers who I purposely kind of don't try and figure out what's coming. I like to just enjoy the experience. I generally have an idea of where it's going, or I have, like, ideas of what plot twist could be. This one, no clue. Blindsided me time and time again. Like, we hit a point in this book where it, like, drastically shifted the entire story and genre, and my jaw dropped, and I was very impressed by it. So I gave this 5 stars. I thoroughly enjoyed it. It's definitely not going to be everybody's cup of tea. I don't think it was the best thriller I've ever read. I don't even know if I would consider it a thriller, to be honest, but it was just a ride of a book, and I enjoyed it quite a bit. Ooh, the next book I don't have a physical copy of. I'm gonna buy it before the year is over, for sure, because it is a new favorite book of mine, period. I went off with a recommendation of a whole bunch of different booktubers who were raving about this book last year, and I was like, I think it's time to read this book. And that book is Wolfsong by TJ Klune. Oh my god, do I love this book so much. I haven't continued on with the series just because I'm nervous because of how much I liked that book, that, like, I just kind of want to, like, dwell in that for a little bit. This is a werewolf story, and it's long, it's dense, it's slow, it takes place over many years, and it was so good. I can't even express how much I love this book. It's been a long time since I have been this obsessed with a book. While I was reading it, it was all that I could think about. And it's been a long time since I've had that feeling where, like, the second that I was listening to it, the second I stopped listening to it, all I wanted to do was go back and find out what was happening to the characters. It's all I thought about all day long when I wasn't listening to it. It's so good. So this follows Ox. Our main character's name is Ox, and we kind of start his story at, like, when he's really young, in, like, a prologue, when you can see that he's kind of emotionally abused by his father, who is now out of the picture. And he just kind of had a really rough upbringing with his mom. And the story kind of kicks off when this family moves in down the street from him, and he gets, like, taken into their family, sort of. The one thing that I loved about this book is that Ox, our protagonist, is self-proclaimed slow. and it was handled so well. That's something that I feel like you don't really see in protagonists very often. I feel like protagonists are always very intelligent. They have like these special snowflake features about them. They're never average, even if they're supposed to be average. But this is the opposite thing, where he's aware of the fact that he thinks and talks slower than everybody else, and everybody else is aware of that fact, but it's never a thing. Like, it's never something that's brought up, like, as a plot device. It's just a part of his character, and I really, really liked that about him, and I feel like it's very important to his character that he was that way, and it was just so nice to read from. I don't know, I just really like that part of it. That's a very small part of the story, but it stood out to me. So, like I said, we are following him from when he's kind of like a young middle teenager, and this family moves in down the street. We slowly start to figure out that they are a werewolf pack, and they are kind of accepting him into this pack. The introduction basically happens because he's walking down the street one day, and this little boy runs up to him, and they just become instant best friends. And their friendship is one of the most wholesome and beautiful friendships I've ever read in a book. I just adore them so, so much. And it's basically that friendship that introduces him into this family and into this pack. And everything gets unraveled really, really slowly. It's a very slow building story, and it's kind of necessary for the relationships that get developed through this. It was so beautifully done, and it was the most realistic werewolf story, as in it uses realistic wolf pack dynamics, and I just adored it. So it basically takes the found family trope to an extreme, and that's like my favorite thing to read about in stories. So it was just so good. I can't even express how much I loved the story and all of the characters. So it basically spans a very, very long time. It spans from when these boys are really, really young until they're like in their 30s, I want to say. So a couple decades. And it just follows their relationship, and it's just so wholesome. The story is beautiful and queer and just everything. And I think what I liked about it is it focuses more on relationships and characters than the paranormal part. Like, the werewolf stuff is definitely still there, and there is still some magic in the story, but it's not like paranormal in your face. It's very much just a real life story with these things thrown in that really help bond relationships stronger. And I think that's why I liked it so much. It was so good. I saw that Chandler, hold on, I need to find Chandler's review of it, because I feel like her little tagline that she put in her review was exactly how I would pitch it. Let's see, hold on. She said, "Imagine if Bella didn't suck and had chosen the werewolves and was also gay." Like, that right there is this book in a nutshell. It was so good. So good. So I am going to continue on. I do have the second book ready to go, and I'm nervous, but I love these characters so much. And I know it still follows the same characters, so I'm ready. But God, this book just stuck with me for so long, and I love it so much, and I already want to reread it. So read this book. It's great. Okay. I have a book. I'm going to keep this brief. I'm not going to go on and on about this book in this review, but I know you guys have been curious about my thoughts on it, and I did finally get to it, so I'm gonna include it a little bit here. I feel like I might make a video about this later on in life, but I did finally read The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern. Okay. I have thoughts on this. I'm falling in the minority here, but I feel like it's gonna be all on me, not necessarily the book, not your reading experience. I didn't love this. I know. I still think this deserves a full 5 stars. I still think this is one of the most beautifully interwoven stories I've ever read. I don't think I was in the headspace to fully appreciate this. Like, I enjoyed it, I kept up with it, and it was good, and I can appreciate everything that was in this book, but it was just long to me, and it was paced very slowly on purpose, and I'm acknowledging this, but I just don't think I was in the right headspace at the time that I was reading this. So I think this is going to be a book that I'm going to revisit probably multiple times in the next couple years, to just take something different away from it, because there are so many things in the story that you could just pull apart like one aspect and really deep dive and really evaluate the symbolism of the bees or the portal stories or there's so many things in this book that you could pick apart and really analyze. Like, I feel like you could teach a college course about just this book alone. So this book has everything that I should have loved in it, but I don't know if I just wasn't in the mood for fantasy at this time. I just couldn't connect with the characters, but that does not detract from the fact that I think this is one of the best books I've ever read. So this is 100% a me problem. I am still giving this a full 5 stars, even though I tend to rate on enjoyment factor a lot in my reviews. I can fully appreciate everything that this book had and how interwoven it was and how well developed every aspect of the story was. I'm excited to reread this in like a year and see what I take away from it at that point. Now that I kind of have an overall grasp of the whole story, I really want to go back and just like really immerse myself in it. I don't think this is a book that you can rush in any way, and I just was not in the mood for a very long, drawn-out story when I was reading it. So those are my brief thoughts on it. I'm sorry if that was disappointing to you. I still acknowledge it. The Night Circus is still one of my favorite books of all time. This still had the whimsy factor that her books have. This is her second book, but you can definitely tell this is a Morgenstern book. It has the same beautiful, whimsical writing, the purplest of prose, but it just was not me at the time that I was reading it. So that's it for this one. Okay, taking a turn in genres. The next book I want to talk about is Docile by K.M. Sbarra. I don't know how to say the last name. Okay. This book was a ride. Okay. If I were rating this purely on enjoyment factor and addicting writing, this would be like a 5-star read. Separating that from what this book actually is, I feel like I'm settling at like a 3 to 4 star. I gave it 4 stars on Goodreads just because I really did enjoy the reading experience, but if you actually tear this book apart, it's probably a 3-star book. So this story, in case you guys haven't heard of this book yet, this is an adult dystopian-ish, slight sci-fi aspect type of story. This basically takes place somewhat in the future where the class system is pretty broken. We basically have these stupid rich people and we have poor people. There's no in between. You are basically either vastly in debt and you inherit all of your family's debt and it just repeats down the line, or you have crazy stupid money. The society has basically created a system where you can kind of offer yourself, your body, you as a person, to these stupid rich people to be a docile for them, and you are essentially a servant to them. The tagline is, "There's no consent under capitalism," and I feel like that's very fitting for the story. So if you become a docile, you basically are put into a system where you can be bought by a person of higher stature than you to do as they will with you. And you can interpret that in all of the ways because it's interpreted in all of the ways. You are essentially a sex slave to them. You are also a servant to them. You are also just a thing to bring around and show off to their other rich friends. And in order to make this process somewhat more doable for all of the people who want to pay off their debts, there is a drug called Dosaline, which you can take, which basically just numbs you down, and you are kind of not really aware of what's happening to your body and what is happening around you. You are just a mindless servant. And it kind of eases the process because you are used and abused as a docile, so it kind of just shuts your brain down so that you can pay your dues. That's the basis of this world, and in the story we were following a guy who puts himself into the system to pay off his family's debt so that his younger sister doesn't have to do this as well. Ends up getting purchased by the heir to the throne of the Dosaline drug. He is the son of the creator of this drug, so obviously stupid money. He gets bought for a life term servitude, and he refuses the drug because his mom did the same thing and she ended up having long-term side effects and it never really wore out of her system and she is just like this mindless drone. So he refuses this drug, and the story basically follows him with his owner as they start to fall in love. So this, I feel like this one quote on the back says, "This is what 50 Shades of Grey could have been if it had only been brutally honest with itself." And I feel like that's very fitting. This book is explicit. E-X-P-L-I-C-I-T. I forgot how to spell the word. Gwen Stefani. This shit is explicit. There's a lot of sex in this book. It's explicit. It's very graphic. So if that's a turnoff for you, stay away from this book, especially because you're dealing a lot with power dynamics in this book. Obviously, this is very much a BDSM-focused story because, again, your consent is non-existent in this world, and you're essentially a permanent submissive, not really by choice, but kind of by choice because you put yourself in the system. So it explores all aspects of that. It explores a lot of things, but it does it in a, I'm not forcing it to be a healthy relationship, like they're aware that it's an unhealthy relationship. So this book, okay, I loved this book while I was reading it. It is so addicting to read. If you're really into things that like push your comfort zone, it's uncomfortable for a lot of scenes. There are definitely some touchy scenes in this. There's a lot of sex in this. So for enjoyment factor, you're at the edge of your seat the entire time you're reading this. It's super fast-paced, it's really addicting. Stepping back from it now, because I read this about a month ago, this has the makings to be something that should have had a huge wow factor for me, and I feel like the first half of this book introduces you to this huge world, this huge concept that could be mind-boggling. It could turn into this amazing dystopian thing, because as you're being introduced to the science behind this drug and the dynamics of society at this point, you can see all of the cracks that are starting to happen, and you can kind of see where the story's going. So the first half of this book has these big picture concepts of society and consent and capitalism and all of these things, but the second half of this book focuses so much on this relationship, this very unhealthy sexual relationship, and it kind of turns into like a courtroom drama in the second half, which, as you're reading it, those are the things that you as a reader want to know about because you're so attached to the characters at this point. But I feel like if that overarching umbrella, big picture concept was introduced at the beginning, was kept for the whole story, it could have had a huge wow moment at the end. But I feel like this ultimately just turned into a messed up romance, which I'm here for. So it was enjoyable for me, but I feel like it could have been something so much bigger because it had really heavy concepts introduced to it. So if you guys are okay with some uncomfy stuff and some uncomfy sex scenes and somewhat torture-y scenes, pick this up. It's very interesting. But if those are things that are not appealing to you, definitely don't pick this up because it's not going to be up your alley. The next book I want to talk about is a book that you guys saw me reading in my Contemporary-thon vlog, and I just loved it. I've read some 5-star books this year and I'm pretty happy with that. I feel like that's a really exciting thing for me, but this little book has still stuck with me. This is Mindy McGinnis's newest book called Be Not Far From Me, and it is a survival story, and it's brutal and it's quick and it's just so good. The protagonist in this is so tough and fearless that like, ooh, I don't think I could have done half the stuff that she did in this story, but this is basically about a girl who goes off partying in the woods, stumbles upon her boyfriend cheating on her when she's very, very drunk, punches him in the face, and then runs away, and then wakes up in the morning not having any idea where she is in the woods. But she has spent her entire life being really into outdoorsy, camping, survival, hiking type of things, and because of that, she manages to somewhat survive. But in this drunken run that she did overnight, she really, really hurt her foot, so she's dealing with a really bad infected injury on top of surviving in the wilderness completely alone. So if you guys like survival stories, this is such a good one. It was so fast-paced and so gritty and great, and I just really liked this character because I feel like this character didn't really need to be developed. Like, she wasn't like this girl who needed like to go into the survival situation to come into her own strength. Like this chick was already strong to begin with, but I just really liked her character. She was just really badass and just did what needed to be done. So if you guys like really harrowing survival stories that are pretty gruesome and graphic with the details, pick this up. It was so fun. I gave this 5 stars. I really liked it. Okay, one of my most anticipated books of the entire year was Wild at Heart by K.A. Tucker. This is the sequel to The Simple Wild, which I have been so anxiously awaiting and nervous about, but excited about, because I love The Simple Wild so much, and I was nervous about this one just because I didn't want it to be tainted in any way. This book was so good, guys. I just adore Jonah and Calla so much. This is what I want a lot of romance follow-up books to be, where it's real life of being in a long-term relationship, and it's not just like the excitement of falling in love. It actually deals with like long-term relationship stuff that you deal with and you go through in relationships, and it was so real. Slight spoilers for Simple Wild. If you haven't read Simple Wild, maybe click away from this while I'm holding this book up, because I'm going to talk about like how that book concluded and into this book. So obviously this is following Calla and Jonah as they go back to Alaska and they start basically their lives together. And it's Calla who is still really having to adjust and really changing her lifestyle to live in Alaska with Jonah and really accept what it's like to have a pilot as a husband who just is adventurous and is in dangerous situations a lot of the time, and what it's like basically being in a relationship with somebody like that and not having your own life yet to really distract from that. So as somebody who just got married, has been in a very long-term relationship, this was such a refreshing book to read because I feel like all of the things discussed in this book might not be sexy and exciting to a lot of people if you're getting into the romance genre. This is probably not the most appealing book, but it was so real to what a relationship is like. Like, they fight over money, they fight over like long-term picture stuff, and when is it okay to get married, or when is it okay to have these big discussions. And it was so real, and I just loved it. And it just like reiterated my love for Kala and Jonah and how much they belong together and how good they are. But I just really like seeing a very realistic approach to what a relationship is like beyond the honeymoon stage, because like, yeah, you still love each other and you're still willing to do anything for each other, but what does that really mean if you're giving up a lot of yourself in this relationship? And how do you find yourself in a relationship when you're so in it with another person? It was just so good. I loved it so much. Also, guys, there's a goat in this, and this has everything that I like in books. So it has a goat. They end up getting a goat in this. It also has like a grumpy old neighbor character that like you slowly start to fall in love with because he's just so crotchety. And we have her learning how to garden and homestead, which are things that really appeal to me. That's probably not everybody's cup of tea, but I love that stuff. I love gardening. I love watching homesteading things. So if you like outdoorsy stuff with a little touch of real life romance, oh, it's so good. Okay. That's it. I'm done with this now. All right, the last book that I just finished yesterday as I'm filming this that I still, oh man, I hurt from this book. I read A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara. Oh, this book, man. Okay, I mean, look at the cover. This is what I looked like all day yesterday. I'm sure a lot of you have read this or know about this, so I'm not going to go in depth about like what the story is about or anything, but if you want to hurt from a book, like physically ache after reading a book, read this book. This was such a beautifully written story about trauma and depression and life and relationships and abuse and love and friendship. It's like an 800-page story about just like the human character, and oh, it hurt me so good. I have never been so emotionally traumatized from reading a book, and if you've read this, you know what I'm talking about. I literally cried on my bathroom floor for like an hour after reading this book. I can't even express the amount of like emotional pain you feel throughout this book, and like when you finish it, it's just like this cathartic like purging of tears and emotions, and it was just, it's rough. I was reading this with a friend of mine, which I highly recommend if you're going to go into this, go in with like a buddy system, because you're going to need support throughout this, because there were so many scenes that we would both read and we would just message each other and just be like, fuck, like, oh, it's hard. There's every possible trigger warning in this book. There's so many harrowing things in the story, but it was so beautiful, and it just spans so much time of these characters' lives. I'm not going into like synopsis. I'm sure you guys know what this book is about, but just know that I physically ached from reading this book. And if a book can invoke a physical reaction, whether that's good or bad, I feel like that speaks volumes for the writing. If you ever need to have a really, really good cathartic sob, pick this book up and read it. And it's rough, but give it the time that it deserves. Don't rush through it, because I feel like you need to like read each section and process each section. Oh, Jesus Christ, this book was painful, but it was so good. So, on that positive note, that's where I'm going to stop, because that was the last book that I just finished, and I just have feelings now. It was rough. So, those are some books that I've read recently. This is probably still going to be a really long thing to edit, but I'd rather go more into detail about the books that I feel strongly about than just talk about like books that were meh for me. If you guys would like to actually keep up with what I'm reading in real time and see my thoughts on everything that I'm reading, you can follow me on Goodreads, because I actually keep that really up to date. So you can see all like 30-something books that I've read. I think I'm on like book like 33 right now. So if you would like to keep up to date with everything that I've been reading, follow me on there. Go for it. That's I don't do very well thought out reviews on there. It's mostly just star ratings, but you can at least get a feel for where I am with my reading tastes. And that's gonna be it for this video. If you guys like this, let me know. If you guys have read any of these, let me know. And that's gonna be it. I will see you guys in my next video.